My name is Diane Proctor, and welcome to this fantastic reception for Ken Burns, really America's most important storyteller. There are many. There are many to thank for today's event, but most importantly, Emily Smith, the director of the library and organizer extraordinaire. Where are you, Emily? Yay, woo! And Anka Vos, curator of the William Monroe Special Collections housed in this library and the progenitor of Ken's visit to Concord. Anka, where are you? Anka, where are you? Yay! Oh, there you are. We gathered this afternoon. Oh, as well, thanks go to Faye Allen for the beautiful flower arrangement over there and to creating tonight's flower arrangement, and to Polly Meyer and Laurie Stefanoff, who have really greeted folks at the door and have been the backbone of all things Concord 250. I mean, they've been absolutely amazing. We gathered this afternoon and throughout this weekend to celebrate the country's 250th anniversary of the shot heard around the world. And more importantly, we gather to recall the fundamental principles embedded in our history, individual liberty and justice for all, that we cannot afford to lose and must fight diligently to protect and preserve. Yes. As a measure of our respect for all Ken Burns and his team do to forward these very principles, we offer him this painting. So, Ken, if you want to come up. Yep. Of a Concord Minuteman, the statue by Concord's Daniel Chester French, but portrayed by the artist Sylvia Sawyer. It was commissioned to commemorate the 100th anniversary since the battle at North Bridge. And here we are, 50 years later. He's going to do something pretty wonderful. He's going to say goodbye to everybody, and he's going to sequester himself. And I can see them around this room right now. Yay, there you are, with a series of students, because Ken has said all along that he wants really to connect with students, and that he's so interested in that generation, carrying forth the work that he's doing and the principles to which he's devoted makes all the difference in the world. So they're going to go away to the trustees room, talk with him. There's going to be lots of food here for you all to enjoy. And just thank you all so much for coming. Okay.
Good evening. It's wonderful to see lots of familiar faces as we get closer and closer to the very special day. A number of us have been working for many years on. My honor this evening is to welcome Representative Lori Trahan. She is the Congresswoman for the Massachusetts 3rd Congressional District. We are so privileged and honored to have her here this evening. She's been an enthusiastic and strong supporter of our 250th efforts, and we are glad that she is here this evening. Representative.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is such an honor to be with all of you in Concord for such a momentous occasion, the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. This town, this very ground, holds a unique place in our country's history and the story of our nation. It's where ordinary people made an extraordinary choice to rise up to resist tyranny and to fight for an idea that had never been fully realized before, that government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. Today we gather not only to remember that pivotal moment, but to reflect on what it means for us now, 250 years later, in a country that's still striving to live up to the founding promise. That's why it's so meaningful to share this stage with someone like Ken Burns, a gifted storyteller who has dedicated his life to helping us understand the full sweep of American history. Through his films, Ken reminds us that history is not just a series of dates and names. It's a living, breathing guide, full of triumphs and mistakes, of courage and contradiction that can help inform our present and shape our future. Ken's upcoming series on the American Revolution comes at a time when we need that perspective now more than ever. In today's deeply divided world where reality is too often discarded in favor of misinformation that conforms with our views, the work of historians and documentarians like Ken is essential. They bring us back to the facts. They help us understand where we've been. And they challenge us to consider how we move forward together. Because the revolution that began here in Concord wasn't just about a single battle, it was about a bold collective leap of faith, one that depended on everyday people, farmers, blacksmiths, teachers, mothers, people who chose hope over fear, principle over comfort, freedom over submission. That lesson, that democracy depends on the courage and conviction of ordinary citizens, is just as relevant today as it was in 1775. As we celebrate this milestone, let's also recognize that we each have a role to play in preserving the democracy those patriots fought to create. And let's continue to support the historians, the educators, and the truth tellers who ensure that the story of America, in all its complexity, is never forgotten, never oversimplified, and never taken for granted. Thank you to the Concord 250 Committee. Thank you to the town of Concord for keeping our history alive. Thank you to Ken Burns and his incredible team for all the work to illuminate our past. And thank you to everyone here today who understands that the best way to honor our founders is not just to remember their sacrifice, but to emulate their courage. Let's continue to learn from our history and use it to light the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for those words. My name is Rob Monroe. I am Gary's other half as co-chair of the 250th Executive Committee. It's an honor to introduce State Senator Mike Barrett, who represents us in the 3rd Middlesex District. Senator Barrett's been a very large advocate and proponent for the 250th since its very beginning. He's been someone with whom we've been in communication from the start to ensure that these events this weekend are going to be safe and fun and large. And so, without further ado, Senator Barrett.
Thank you, Robert, Gary, Diane. It's terrific to be here to honor all of you and to hear from Ken Burns, who always does brilliant work. I could name my favorite Ken Burns documentaries, but I won't because we have limited time. I can only tell you whether it's been baseball or whether it's been civil rights or it's been European art. He's been an extraordinary leader. It's terrific that we're meeting here, isn't it, to hear from Ken, because the library is the perfect setting. This is Dick Goodwin's private library behind there in glass. You read the titles of those books on the spines. It's all about aspiration directed toward governing ourselves better. And it's a comfort to know that there are a lot of crises written up there. I know when Ken started putting together this documentary, I've heard him interviewed once or twice about it. He couldn't have known that after 10 years of labor, his efforts would find culmination just in time for Concord's 250th. Isn't that serendipity? He also couldn't have known, of course, that he would finish his work as we confronted the challenges posed to all of us by this current president of the United States. And isn't it a blessing that we should find some comfort available to us from his work at this particular moment? One of the things that emerges as we think about the revolution and as we recite the stories ourselves is that back then, confronted with a terrible crisis, life-threatening, existential. There was no reading ahead. Nobody could tell how this was all going to end up 250 years ago. Uncertainty is a terrible affliction. I think many of us are enduring it right now. There are some of us who feel that we're being tested more seriously than at any time since 1775. So it is with enormous appreciation that I want to join all of you in welcoming Ken Burns here, because we need his work. We need the message of comfort. We need the lessons about dealing with uncertainty, and we need to be reminded that it's possible to prevail through it all. Thank you.
Senator, I think that was my cue. Thank you very much for those kind words. You know, yesterday, United States Senator Ed Markey said that don't agonize, organize. But of course, in his thick Massachusetts accent, it sounded like exactly the same word. It was really impassioned and only interpreted by the citizens of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. First of all, I agree wholeheartedly, but I'd really like to just say what she said. The Congresswoman, I think, hit the nail on the head for what's going on and the way in which our history can be used. I am so happy to be back in Concord. I spent my first summer after my first year at college teaching at the Concord Academy, kids who were bussed in from Roxbury to learn filmmaking. And in the evenings, I would go to the Concord prison and teach a young inmate who was my age, 19 years old, to read, to write, to think, to have conversations. And so I've had a really long association with Concord, and I am a long-time friend of Dick Goodwin and of Doris. And I saw Doris last night and told her I was coming. She told me about this magnificent collection. It's hard to think of these books being transformed from their house to here, but I'm so glad they found a very good home. I've also been serving as the executive producer and senior creative advisor on a film that my colleagues have been working on for many years, which is a 3-part, 3-hour documentary on Henry David Thoreau. Him. And it's really nearing completion. I had the opportunity, every once in a while, the people that are supposedly my colleagues but are really my slave drivers permit me to go home to do laundry, to pet the dog, and in this case, to have several intensive viewings of the entire thing and give notes. And it's gorgeous, it's beautiful. And in it, the late historian David McCullough, who's been a mentor to so many of us, tried to think about the centrality of Massachusetts in the history of the United States, and then focuses on this Middlesex town. And you begin to think, if you've got Ralph Waldo Emerson and Louisa May Alcott, who, by the way, summered in my little town of Walpole, New Hampshire. And so we know the Alcott House there and here. And having Henry David as well, you begin to see that maybe the center of the intellectual birth of our country is in this town. And it is such a pleasure to come back. And I think it's going to take that kind of thinking and that kind of sort of brain power to get us through what we're talking about, to not agonize, as so many of us are doing, but to organize, as Senator Markey said yesterday. And I'm very just happy to share this film. As the senator said, we did not, and his point about contingency is really right. At no point during this did anyone have the ability to read ahead, to know how it was going to turn out. And David McCullough himself said to me many, many years ago that good history is reading it, feeling it as if it's not going to turn out the way you know it is going to turn out. A good example is many people have come up to me over the previous 35 years to tell me how much they arrived at the Ford's Theater scene in the last episode of our Civil War series and really hoped the gun would jam. And that meant that we had done our job, that we got into a moment where you couldn't bear what you knew was going to happen anyway. And I think if we understand our revolution, it helps us understand, as the Congresswoman said, the extraordinary bravery and courage of the people who were moving towards the sound of gunfire, who were struggling before the war even began, as women did, to replace all the British goods that had been boycotted. I think without many of the people in our film said, without the women involved in the resistance in this state and in others, the revolution wouldn't have had the kind of purchase it had throughout all of the colonies, particularly in Massachusetts, where it all began. And so I have buried the lead because it's been a long, long day. I think I was pretty good at about 7:30 this morning and less good, 10 hours later at 5:30. But on November 16th, 2025, PBS will begin broadcasting and streaming our six-part 12-hour history of the American Revolution. I say our, not out of any royal we, although someone reminded me today that they thought the proceedings in Lexington had made me look like royalty. I reject that. I am a citizen, the highest office of the land. But the we comes from the fact that we are here with my two co-directors and two co-producers, Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt, and many other of our crew are here. And I'm also so happy that our conversation this evening after the screening will involve the distinguished writer, Rick Atkinson, who is 2/3 of his way through an extraordinary trilogy. I've read both of the books on the American Revolution, and the second volume will be out in just a handful of days. And we've been traveling now with Rick for what seems like 3 straight weeks, but it's actually since 7:30 this morning. And we've been out before on the road and met up in Virginia, and we'll meet up again on the Revolutionary Trail. But he is an extraordinary writer and has written an amazing book. And you'll see him. He is the first voice in our film, the first talking head that you see, and he is the last one. And that gives you a sense. This is nothing you plan. This is something that's earned by the extraordinary scholarship and art of his writing. And so we're so happy to, at least for a day, have him involved in our whirlwind, which makes the 3 weeks that today has been a little less long. So Rick Atkinson, you'll get a chance to meet and see tonight. And I see David Schmidt, and there's Sarah Botstein in the back sitting down because she's wearing I'll translate. She's wearing high heels and we've been standing all day. I did not wear my high heels today, and I warned her. I said, please don't. I left mine behind. Please, but she didn't. Anyway, we're very happy. The most important thing, as was said at the beginning, is that we're very excited that we'll be at the Concord Carlisle High School, that we'll have lots of kids involved in this as well, and that we can share just a handful of clips, just a fraction of the total film, but we hope it will wet your whistle and give you a chance to understand what we've been up to, and to also thank you all for being part of our film. We could not have done it without the work and the research that we've done here and in other places in Middlesex County, and so thank you very much, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Are there any groups in Concord that you work with to make this documentary?
We shot along the Battle Road and dealt with reenactors along the Battle Road. That's been important. There are also, of course, the library and other historical places that, we were looking for images, looking for paintings, looking for drawings, looking for maps. So, and that's true all up and down the 13 former colonies, that we've had to draw. I mean, you would think that making a film would be additive, right? You're just like building a house, but it's subtractive. We collect about 500 hours of material in order to then sort of like a sculptor's stone, just chop away at it to try to figure out how to tell the story. And so we're dealing with many more archives than we're ever going to use, many more maps, many more parts of interviews, live cinematography, photographs of photography of reenactors, music, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, kind of further on that vein of you saying documentary making is subtractive and not additive. When I saw your talk in Lexington today, which was fantastic, the thing that I was asking myself was, do you consider yourself a historian or a filmmaker first, and how do you reconcile those two kind of facets of your personality?
I'm most definitely a filmmaker. That's what I wanted to be since I was 12 years old. That's what I am. By the time that meant feature filmmaker at 12. At 18, when I went to Hampshire College, I was sort of persuaded to be a documentary filmmaker. And then by the end, it turns out I was doing history things. So there's nothing to reconcile. The United States has a really wonderful tradition of popular historians. Henry Adams, many people have written things that have been gobbled up, that have not necessarily come out of the academy, which is maybe the question about history versus storytelling. And Rick Atkinson is a really good example of that. Someone who's a journalist who becomes a historian as well, but we're storytellers first and foremost, and that's what history mostly is story.
I was wondering, especially after hearing Congresswoman Lori Trahan ask a lot about how what you're covering in this documentary applies to today, and how a lot of people are discontent and maybe want change in our political systems. And I'm interested as to how you see how what you're covering in the American Revolution relates to change, I guess, today, and what we can learn from it, what we can learn not to do.
That's a really wonderful question, and I wish I had a simple answer. I'll tell you that part of the discipline of what we do is to not pay attention to what's going on. This project was born in December of 2015, so Barack Obama had 14 months to go in his second term. A lot of stuff has happened. And we've known from experience that every time we finish a film, we lift up and see the way it is speaking to things that are going on right now. That's been true from our very first film. And in fact, I often have a stump speech that goes something like, what if I told you I'd been working on a film for many years, and then I'd list things about single issue political campaigns that metastasized with horrible unintended consequences, about demonization of recent immigrants to the United States, about a whole group of people who felt they'd lost control of their country and wanted to take it back. You would say, gee, it's just, you made a film about it today. This is a film we made on Prohibition. And you go, wait a second, where are the flappers? Where are the gangsters? Where are the machine guns? And they're there, but the more interesting thing is this single issue political campaign that brought on the only amendment to the Constitution so far that restricts human rights, and the only one so far that's been repealed. And so what you have to do is discipline yourself as you're working on the story to realize that human nature rarely changes, and that the characters you meet in the past, the activities that they're engaged in, the results of those activities really resonate with today. Mark Twain is supposed to have said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And if he did say it, that's the best thing. History has never repeated itself. No event has ever happened twice, right? But we do understand the rhymes. And so the discipline for us is to attend to the complexity of the story, to do justice to the complexity of the moment, and to honor the complexity of the individuals that we're engaged in. Nobody is wholly villainous and nobody is wholly heroic in any circumstance. And that once you've done that and you've wrestled with very complex dynamics of storytelling, which are really hard to keep a lot of these balls in the air and keep characters existing across many, many episodes, you then finish, and then you lift up and you go, oh. And I think what you're speaking to is the critical moment we seem to find ourselves in, the divisions between people, the threats to the democratic form of government. And then you could say that a story about the American Revolution could be helpful for people to reacquaint themselves. And it's not just
the people who think like us or me, but everybody could find a place where they could own a little bit of his story and its complexity and perhaps help us move back again more together. I mean, Thomas Paine himself, who is the articulator of our values. I mean, without common sense, we probably wouldn't have had the Declaration as soon as we did. He gave us permission to blame the king and not Parliament. He told us that hereditary succession was the stupidest thing on earth, that the idea that you could set your own family up in perpetual power, this is a terrible thing. He himself couldn't believe that there could possibly be any commonality because of the differences in Americans from New Hampshire to Georgia, the 13 colonies. And so it's interesting that after sort of saying it would seem impossible, he then is one of the architects in ideas and sort of public opinion of how we might do that. And as we find that tapestry of our cohesion has frayed, then maybe the story of how we, from disparate places and different points of view, different religious beliefs, different politics, whatever it might be, could come together to form the United States, then it's not out of the question that could happen again, particularly since these institutions have served us so well for so long. You know, not perfectly, obviously, not for everybody, obviously, but that's the project.
Do you find those connections just as, I know in the case of Vietnam or of Prohibition, the connections might be easier to find from historical events to today, but do you find in something like on Da Vinci or another thing that's maybe less focused on the historical aspect and more on a specific person, connections to today? Because it seems like there's always a way to find a connection from what you were just doing when you lift your head up to then look at the world today and say, oh.
Yeah, you're never really finding, they're sort of right there and obvious. And Leonardo is an interesting case because it's the first non-American topic I've done. And I resisted it because I thought I'm going to be in another country, both literally, temporarily, of course, but also would be unfamiliar for me. But it wasn't. It was just happens to be arguably the person of the last millennium, you know, the greatest artist of his age and maybe of all time, certainly the most famous painting on earth, who happens to be the greatest scientist of his time, way ahead of Galileo and Newton. And he basically has dreamed for us all that we have imagined of ourselves technologically and in other ways since then. And he would be the first to say, I mean, I used to say that, you know, that the Mona Lisa is a great work of science as well as a great work of art, and some of his anatomies are great works of art in addition to being great works of science. And I can feel him chastising me that I would ever think that you could be a great work of art without being a great scientist. And there's a wonderful wholeness to approaching him. So everything resonates, everything rhymes, and what I think is most interesting is a subject, maybe we'll skip Leonardo, he's so far in the past, but something as distant, 250 years, as the American Revolution could resonate so completely and absolutely in almost every breath. I mean, you want an invasion of Canada? We got one. Do you want to have a big argument about inoculations? We've got that. Want to meet some unscrupulous people betraying the promise of the United States? Got that. You know, we're it's all there, and then I think it's essentially a toolbox, and the question is not one which we should spend too much time discussing, or as Senator Markey said, agonizing over. But you know, you got to kind of get started and organize.
Do you view your documentaries as a way for people to open those toolboxes and to use them?
No. I recognize that may be a beneficial byproduct, but our intention is to tell a good story. Beginning, middle, and end, period. And then what you make of it, what, you know, the circumstance, and we've been very fortunate in the films that we've made that they have come out at a time when people seem to say, this is the perfect time. It happened with the Civil War, it's happened with baseball. There was a strike going on when our film was broadcast. There was no baseball. It was supposed to be the end of the pennant races and moving into the postseason, nothing. Jazz, the national parks, for some reason it seemed to resonate with the time, and we don't do focus groups. I mean, we just do whatever the gut says, are drawn to it. And so, as I said, this was born in December of 2015, and here we are, 9+ years later, and we're surprised at the way it's resonating, but all we want to do is make sure, and it's not completely finished. Only 2 of the episodes are finished, and today Sarah and I were talking about a couple little changes we make in the episodes to do it. Nothing that you might notice, but it's important to us. So it's just to get it out, and then what you will make of it, and particularly you guys, are going to have to, clean up the mess.
So would you say that as the purpose of history and this kind of storytelling through film, do you see it as more of this like objective way to convey a story, or do you think that there is some kind of perhaps like emotion or reaction that you're hoping to elicit from audiences of these films, or do you think it is more just this general aspect of telling a good story that people can appreciate, or is there a specific like reaction?
There's not a specific reaction you're looking for, but that's an extraordinary question. The one word I'd pull out would be objective. Nothing's objective except when she's not telling, Do you know what I mean? So there's all a subjectivity to it. Of course, historians in different eras find different things from the same moment in the past. We tend to think of our future as unknown and our past as fixed. Our past is extraordinarily malleable, right? As new perspectives, as distance comes from it. We made a film on Vietnam, which the fact that we were 40 years out was all the difference. If we'd made it 10 years out of the fall of Saigon, and America was, in the middle of a recession. Vietnam would remain this ball and chain that would be the symbol of our decline. Japan was ascendant. Talk about the Pacific Rim. It wasn't us, it was them in Asia. If you'd waited 10 more years to 85, the Vietnam War would have huge significance, but we were the sole superpower. We were in the middle of what was then the biggest peacetime economic expansion in the history of the United States. You'd say, cautionary tale, a blip in our story, a bump in the road, right? You wait another 10 years to 2005, we're bogged down in Afghanistan and Iraq. They're beginning to use the analogies and the inferences of another Vietnam, and so has the Vietnam War changed? No. What happened hasn't changed. How we see it, the perspective we've done it. And then there's constant scholarship going on, which is transforming what we know. Things are declassified. We have a relationship with the country of Vietnam now. So a lot of things are loosened up. We benefited from lots of declassified Vietnamese intelligence and history that made our work different. There are presidential tapes that haven't been listened to of Nixon and Johnson. So you get what I'm seeing, the past is constantly changing. So we can, if we remove the subjectivity from it, then it just becomes good storytelling. But the word truth is also complicated because there's lots of different ways to see it. And what we've tried to do in our films is construct not just complex narratives that are able to tell a variety of stories, but complex perspectives that bring in lots of different ways to view the war. So I remember sitting around a table, Sarah will remember this, David, two of our advisors on the Vietnam thing, 23 of them, and somebody would speak and the other 22 would look at them like, whoa, I didn't know that. And so all of a sudden you begin to realize if each one of them was contributing to us something entirely new, that we were going to be able to aggregate all of this new scholarship in one place. That film came out in 2017. It is still the best one-stop shopping for the Vietnam War that there is. And I cannot believe I'm saying that. It is still nothing, no book has replaced it. A book will soon come in and replace it for the depth of the scholarship, but it hasn't happened yet. And so if you want to get the Vietnam War, you would do no better than to study our 10 episodes. But that's the kind of thing. And then you go back to the truth and say, I know a guy who took histories and he conflated characters, he changed countries, he rearranged sort of the chronology. Well, that can't be good. His name is William Shakespeare. And the truths that he got out may be as good, if not better, than anything those of us scribes who are trying to just say and then. So I think your question is so fantastic. All of your questions have been so fantastically to the point of what the story is, that we disabuse ourselves of an absolute truth or an objectivity, but at the same time pursue with a kind of honor and virtue and persistence and attention whatever mode that you're trying to do. And then, you know, the results will speak for itself, and to not try to sort of say, well, what I'd really like is for people to feel these 6 things. I want you to feel whatever you felt. We feel lots of things, and there's decisions that are made that are emotional, that are fact-based. You know, wait, we got that date wrong. You got to fix that, right? That literally happens all the time. And others that the music adds something. A scene with one piece of music and a different piece of music are 2 different scenes, right? We just swapped out tonight you'll see a beautiful aerial view in mist of, in a section about George Washington's centrality to the creation of our country. That is now a zoom in, a very drift in of a window at night where we can imagine there's a uniform, a Continental Army uniform draped over a chair, and we can imagine that it's George Washington. If you're there tonight, will you be there? You think about that shot?
It's the last shot you're going to see.
It's the last shot you're going to see tonight. It's a gorgeous shot. But we all decided, I had a little 3 o'clock in the morning conversation with myself, and then we've been wrestling with alternative things. And that's just one shot of several hundred in that one episode, which also has, you know, complicated maps, which we have refined 20 different times, and, you know, many cues of music, and it's one of 6 episodes. So it's like a 3-dimensional chess game of whatever, and you're going to have a different response to it than I have, and I might have a different response to it tonight than I had at noon today in Lexington.
I was wondering, you're talking about the different perspectives that you have to kind of gather. I was wondering if there's a process or a way in which you have to take in all these sources to then culminate a final product, and if you feel that the way in which you do that has changed as society has modernized and developed over the course of your filmmaking career.
No, that's a really good question too. Extraordinary question. So you want to make, you know, new technologies are the big influences, you know, particularly in my area. But we've been really reticent to adopt them until we're pretty confident that the tail, we don't want the technological tail to wag the dog. We want to still control the narrative and let the narrative, that's storytelling is really what it's about. And technology sometimes gets in the way with all its bells and whistles or the newness, the expediencies that it often suggests, the shortcuts that it often take. And so we're a little bit, you know, worried about that, but we are committed to a process that has literally not changed, though it is completely adapting to the particular circumstance that we're dealing in. I'll give you a very superficial, but a clear idea. There are no photographs of the American Revolution or newsreels, a hallmark of our work. So what do? We recalibrate all of the other elements that we have at our availability. We give up a kind of sort of feeling that reenactments aren't really great, and we've used them very sparingly, and embraced them fully, and have followed from you know all sorts of different reenactors in a very impressionistic, almost painterly way to communicate our stories, and that has helped do that. Maps, we probably have more maps in this one film than all our previous films put together. Hugely important and exciting. Some of them are old, just archival maps, the way we found them. Some are archival maps with arrows put on them. Some of them are maps that we've made based on archival maps. Some are entirely new sui generis maps, and some are made from computer graphics. And we've experimented with them all in a way to offset what would be a perceived deficit. It's just another, we got to figure out how to make lemonade. Lincoln went through all these generals who were just infuriatingly bad, and there were, he'd fired one, and the next one would be worse, and then he'd fire one, he'd come back and he'd bring back somebody else. And at one point he said, we have to use the tools we have, right? I mean, just he once complained that George McClellan, he was sending him so many soldiers. He was terrified of committing these men to battle. And he said sending soldiers to him was like shoveling fleas across a barnyard, which is one of the best images I can ever imagine in my life. And so he's right. You just have to use the tools you have and figure out what's the best way to do it. And so it's funny that as much as I was making my first film that was broadcast on PBS from 1977 to 81. The way we do it, I know a lot more, I think, I hope. But the way we do it is more or less the same. And a lot of it has to do with things that aren't techniques of filmmaking. They just are aspects of human behavior, virtues and other things that you want, honor, out of fashion words, but are really, really important to get it right. And that's why we all three of those two people look so tired, is because we wake up at 3 a.m. going, but, what if we said this,
I hate to stop this. This is so gorgeous.
Well, did Alba or anybody else have a question? Did you?
I wanted to talk about the filmmaking process, like the very beginning, talking about that. Just how does inspiration dawn on you on like your next topic, and does the people around you, events, things that occur, change your trajectory of what's the next theme I would want to push?
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of them are, those lottery things that come on at 7 o'clock and there are all these bouncing balls and one drops down. So you have lots of ideas. And I always like to say that if I were given 1,000 years to live, I'd never run out of ideas in American history. It's true. I won't be given 1,000 years to live. But it happens, things drop down. Now we have some projects that took 30 years to incubate. The last film that we brought out was on the American buffalo, or before Leonardo da Vinci was on the American buffalo, and we'd been talking about it and thinking about it and planning it for 30 years before we finally said go. And it was really good that we waited, because there had been all sorts of new scholarship and all sorts of new Native American scholarship. That is to say, Native Americans had moved to positions of incredible prominence in the academy with regard to Native studies, and particularly the studies of the buffalo. And that was incredibly helpful, and it could help us recenter how we told the story. Another time, I was visiting a friend in Dallas, and he said, "You ever think about doing country music?" And from that moment on, I was doing country music for the next 6 or 7 years. And I had funders who said, "God, country music, Ken, I don't think I can get it. I can help you with this one. I just don't understand." I said, "Okay, but come to this screening." And he came to the screening, and he's crying through all the episodes, and he apologized, And so it's just, you pick them, and we all talk about things, and we readjust ideas. And we're working on a big film called Emancipation to Exodus. I've wanted to, since the Civil War series came out 35 years ago, wanted to do something on Reconstruction, the most misunderstood period in American history. And we're doing something that's backing it up to Black Americans self-emancipating through the Exodus, the beginning of the Great Migration at the end of the 19 teens. African Americans, self-emancipation is an exodus of a kind. And so the exoduses are going on all the time, but it's a way to come to terms with this horrifically misunderstood and almost wantonly, willfully distorted period in which a homegrown terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, called the Ku Klux Klan, could become the heroes of popular films like Birth of a Nation or Ku Klux Klan, completely reversing what actually took place. And it sounds very much like our own complaints of misinformation and disinformation and alternative facts and things like fake news and whatever it is we are talking about now.
Yeah. I have one final question for you. I was wondering, not only as a filmmaker and historian, but also as an American citizen, how do you personally reconcile pride for our nation and really being proud of where we are currently, while also recognizing the shortcomings of our country, and especially the shortcomings that are still prevalent today?
Yeah, that's a perfect question. I think that's sort of been what all of our work is about. And it is a difficult thing sometimes to reconcile. The love of our country is felt, deeply held and felt and complete. It's exceptionalism as well, which is a dirty word now. But also the fact that we have failed in so many ways and have not achieved what we're talking about. That's the center of the dynamic. I mean, that's at the heart of the conflict. Lincoln's first inaugural ends with one of the most magnificently constructed sentences in the history of the English language, which says, he's pleading, we must not be enemies. He's talking to a Southern audience, right? It's March 4th, 1861. There's, 9 states have already seceded since his election, 2 more to go, including Virginia, which is right there across the river. And he said, we must not be enemies, we must be friends. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. And then he said, the mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, and surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. And so I think all of the pursuit has to be ultimately not just in an American dynamic, but in a human dynamic about the better angels, but the understanding of the tension between the wish for the better angels and the ability to deliver them is the nub of human thing, and it makes really for great dramas. And if you're dealing with wars, which is the worst and sometimes paradoxically the best, there's lots of material to not parse, but to experience what you're talking about. That really troubling dynamic, dialectic, torn between the promise and the reality. And so I think storytelling is an aspirational aspect. Not that you're going to say, I need you to feel exactly this at that film, but you are describing both light and darkness, possibility and the absence of possibility, and all of the things that you're doing. And that can be powerful, even just holding it. When Marcellus said in our jazz film, sometimes a thing and the opposite of a thing can be true at the same time. And if you can hold that, you can still love your country and want it to be better.